Hi, everybody. I'm an idiot, and I'm going to tell you why that matters when living with multiple sclerosis. Here we go. I'm Cliff, and this is Life with MS. All right, it's currently 105 degrees outside. I am dying here. I am so fatigued, it's not even funny. I haven't slept in a few days because my spasms are so bad. But I got a question on one of my videos yesterday that I absolutely just have to answer because I think it's really, really important. So I wrote a bunch of this stuff down. I'm going to be reading it to you because I cannot possibly remember it right now. My fatigue is so bad, but this stuff is super important. Anyway, let's hop into it right now. So, a while back, I made a video entitled, I Was Misdiagnosed for Years. It was multiple sclerosis all along, the top 5 misdiagnoses. And I'm going to link that in the description below if you want to watch that. Pretty good, I think, but I'm a bit biased because, well, I made it. And in the comments was a question by Daisy May going by the username, see if I got this right, BabNYBNY. Babini Bini? Babidi Babidi Noob? I'm not really sure. But anyway, Daisy May, I'm attempting to answer the questions you put in the comments. So let's get to it. And Daisy's question was, hi, Cliff. I'm still in the what the hell is wrong with me phase and have everything you listed starting at 9 minutes and 54 seconds in my other video I just mentioned. Daisy asks, did you go to your doctor and tell them you thought you had MS? How did you start that conversation? I'm already on most of the MS medicines for MS, and I'm not sure what else to do. Thank you for your videos. Well, Daisy, thank you very much for watching the videos and leaving the comments. This community is great. It's growing stronger every day, and this type of information is key for people with MS feeling less lonely and finding more answers. Now, just of course, the legal disclaimer, I am not a doctor. I am not a healthcare provider. I am a bald dude beep, boop, 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 on YouTube with multiple sclerosis, documenting his journey and life. But this channel has actually turned into something much more than that. It is now a community of people with multiple sclerosis sharing their survival tactics on living day to day with multiple sclerosis, which is even way better than I ever imagined. So, for those of you out there that are watching this and think you might have a chronic condition or do have a chronic condition like multiple sclerosis, click that subscribe, like, and share if you don't mind. Subscribe at the very least, because this community is very unique and fantastic, and welcome aboard. All right, so back to Daisy's first question in that group of questions. And the first one is, what the hell is wrong with me? And well, the what the hell is wrong with me is a signature chronic condition thinking process. We all go through it, and we're all trying to figure out what the heck is going on, and we all have different types of symptoms. The thing with multiple sclerosis is like you just never know what's wrong with you on any given day because the symptoms vary so much. It's incredibly frustrating. And this becomes especially problematic when you go to try to find a diagnosis because, well, if you're trying to get into a specialist, now the healthcare industry is such that a specialist could be a 3 to 6 month wait before you can see that person. And with multiple sclerosis, your symptoms can completely resolve and go away by the time you see the specialist. And then when you get there, you start thinking to yourself, is this just all in my head? Did I make this up? Was I just having a bad day? And then you go to that appointment, you write it off, and then suddenly, within like 2 weeks, all the symptoms come back. You start feeling like crap again. And you are getting gaslit by the medical system and you are being gaslit by MS. And you're just getting gaslit from every single direction. And it is a huge, frustrating process. And if it's like my situation where I kept going to my general practitioner and physician's assistant who know nothing about multiple sclerosis, the condition gets even worse because then it's being seen as something completely different from MS. And we can't expect them to know the symptoms of MS because the sheer number of different types of symptoms in different types of people and different types of MS would just requires a specialist. And so by following a GP's guidance short of getting a recommendation or a referral to a neurologist, we're kind of flying in the dark. And let me back up here just for a second and say, first off, and I think this is really important. When I say I was an idiot with MS, I'm still much of an idiot. That probably hasn't changed, but what parts of my life I'm an idiot in have very much changed, thankfully, I think. But when I refer to my MS idiocy, it was basically I had this male ego because I was a younger guy and I thought I knew everything and I thought I knew better than everybody. And I thought, well, if there's something wrong with me, I can figure it out. And that was very detrimental, and that was really stupid, and I wanna say that's just part of being me, but that's just part of being a younger male, like, we don't wanna think that we are vulnerable, and that is a problem with this disease because we are very vulnerable, and we can be our own worst enemy when it comes to getting a diagnosis because we just can't get out of our own way. So my point here is don't be an idiot, it's a very steep learning curve, and it's very unnecessary. Follow your gut, and that leads me to another thing. If you are a woman, and especially a young woman in this situation, well, I was married to a young woman and she's still here. She's not as young as she was. That's why I say it's past tense. She's a little bit older now, and we have learned a lot. She's sitting next to me. Hi. She's giving me the evil eye. Like, "Ugh." She was diagnosed with cancer, but in that journey, and that was many years before I was diagnosed with MS, she was gaslit like crazy. Like, she looked fine, and she was going out on bike rides and doing all this stuff, and then suddenly she had this tumor and blah, blah, blah. It got crazy, but she was gaslit and gaslit and gaslit and gaslit, and what we learned from that was if you walk into an appointment as a young woman and the person on the other side of the other person in the room that you're visiting says, "Oh my gosh, you remind me of my daughter," turn around and leave. That's just what we do. Because already there is an implicit bias of what's gonna happen, and it's not gonna end well most of the time. And I also wanna touch on this. Women have this innate ability to understand when there's something not right in their body. I think they're much more attuned to their body than we males are. Like, we can just, like, blow past things even though we don't have a pain tolerance like women. We just don't wanna admit to it, but, like, when things start going wrong with women, they can detect that pretty quickly, and they know what's going on, and for some reason, the medical system, at least here in America, and based on my experience alone and my wife's, they just don't trust what women say, especially if they're young. Like, they're like, "Well, it's all in your head, things are gonna be better, and blah, 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 or maybe it could be this, this, and that." For example, when my wife was diagnosed with cancer, it wasn't a doctor or even a PA or a GP that found the cancer after she insisted on getting answers. It was the guy giving her the MRI, the tech in the MRI room that said, "Listen, you got something going on there. I can't say anything about it, but you need to go see an oncologist." And that was mind blowing. Like, and my wife had been telling her doctors for like months prior to that, like, this is not right. Something is very wrong here. And by the time she got her surgery, her first surgery of 10, they said, "Man, you should have been here like 8 months ago." And we had been there 8 months ago, and they just kept writing it off. "Oh, you're young, you're fine. It's calcium deposits." Just classic, right? And that's true for my friends that are female and younger and have been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. They have a very similar journey. They go in and people say, "Oh, you're having migraines, or maybe you're just anxious, or you're having depression." And unlike me, where they like sit there and listen to me because I'm an older male, they say, "Oh, well, that person's kinda like my daughter or more my niece, and they're just having a bad day." So if you think you're being gaslit, yes, you probably are. Okay, so maybe I'm getting a little emotional about this and really pressing my point, but it aggravates me that, like, for some reason, because someone is female and younger or even older, they're less credible when they're having issues with their health. And I don't know why that is. It seems almost cultural at its roots, which is crazy. Like, this is just nuts. I think we're better than this now. Or at least we need to be better than this. And multiple sclerosis is a very difficult disease to get a diagnosis on unless it's blazingly out of control. Like, early on, if you're younger and it's only showing little symptoms here and there, it could be any number of things. And the diagnostic criteria can be tricky. I think the doctors are doing their best, the nurses are doing their best. I mean, they're working within conditions that are very much rolling a huge ball uphill at this point with the American healthcare system. And what has happened to the healthcare system as it is now is way more than they signed up for. I have friends that are doctors and nurses, and they basically tell me the reason they show up to work and put up with all the bullcrap now is because they don't want their patients who they care deeply for going to lesser capable hands. And that now is happening more often than not. Why do I mention this? Well, it's because if you're looking for a diagnosis for multiple sclerosis, you've got to be persistent, you've got to be consistent, but you also have to be kind, especially as a young woman. It's completely unfair, but as a male, if I'm consistent and persistent, I'm seen as assertive and a leader. But if you're the same as a young woman, you're seen as a bitch, which is crazy. And so you have to be kind, and it can be absolutely infuriating. And I saw this happen with my wife. She was like, I know what's going on with me. I know what needs to be done. I know the questions to ask. And they would just completely write her off. And I've seen this with my MS friends as well. And the problem with being labeled a bitch or super aggressive is basically the phone won't ring when you need answers. And that doesn't serve anyone. Sometimes you just have to be kind, and it is so freaking hard. But it's the way both Andrea and myself have managed to get answers. It's easier to ignore someone you don't like when they're kind of being jerks. Let's not be jerks and not give them a reason to ignore us. So I know that was a bit long-winded. So Daisy May, I'm going to answer your second question here. Did I go to my doctor and tell him that I thought I had MS? Okay, and I'm going to read this line for line because I wrote it out. I wanted to keep it consistent and concise. First off, my GP and I had no idea what was going on with me, and we just kept spitballing ideas, and he just kept throwing antidepressants and Viagra at me, which he thought my depression was causing my erectile dysfunction, but the only time I had any issues with the ED is when I was getting too hot. I would take a hot shower, things wouldn't work. It was hot outside, things wouldn't work. In fact, I was having a lot of bladder issues as well. And so I started to notice a correlation between the temperatures outside and what was going on with me biologically and physiologically speaking. Like things just were not functioning right. And I couldn't really feel anything when it got hot much below my chest here. And that was the first indication that there might be some neural things happening. But that was never mentioned with my GP. And a year and a half down the road after I got my diagnosis, I called my GP and said, you know, that thing we've been chasing for years? Turned out to be multiple sclerosis. And he's like, oh my gosh, I would have never seen that because it's just not my specialty. And I never see that range of symptoms put together. So my point is, you may not be getting gaslit. You may be with the wrong doctor looking at the wrong set of problems to find the wrong set of answers. Like it is a process of elimination. In my case, it was throw all these drugs at me and figure out which ones are working and which ones aren't. And clearly the ones that affect the neurological system seem to have some impact and then tie all that together. It is a very long journey. So if you're going in expecting to get an answer on day one and you're frustrated because you didn't, I would be suspicious if you did, because it's probably the wrong answer. MS takes a long time to get a decent diagnosis. And like I said before, unless it's just a glaring issue and you walk in not being able to feel your legs at all or you're totally blind, like it has to get to a point to where it is well out of control before it's one of those things where you can just look at it and go, oh, you need to see an MS neurologist. So in the interest of brevity, I'll cut out a lot of the other stuff I was going to mention and basically get right to the point here and say I ended up documenting everything and journaling everything. And you may have seen some of my episodes before about people that document and journal their symptoms and finally get a diagnosis. It is a very important part of the process if you're still trying to figure out what's going on with you because you get a much bigger detailed picture of how you're being affected by certain things. So I totally encourage that. I would say I started taking my journaling and documenting things very serious about 18 months prior to my actual diagnosis. And it was a huge part of getting my actual accurate diagnosis. And you might be asking yourself, well, what did I journal? Let's talk about it. I would talk about things like how I felt that day, what I ate, how much I ate, what I drank, how much I drank. I would track how much exercise I got, how I felt throughout the day, track how much sleep I got, how fatigued I was feeling and what I had to do about that fatigue. Did I have to take a nap? Could I just not push through anymore? Or could I kind of push through it and just sleep better that night? It was all over the place. And I started to see trends as I tracked the information. It really started to outline multiple sclerosis by about the eighth month, but was really becoming more concrete by about month 14. And if this journaling thing sounds like a ton of work, it is. Like finding multiple sclerosis is a ton of work in most cases. Like figuring out what kind of multiple sclerosis you have is a lot of work in most cases. It's an expensive journey to go on in both time and commitment and cost. And after I tracked all that information, I brought it together and I went and saw my GP and said, look, this is what's been going on. He looked at it and he says, well, I really don't know. I think you need to start seeing some specialists. And that's when my wife told me she knew somebody at work that had multiple sclerosis that looked a lot like this. So then I asked my GP, can you give me a referral to a local neurologist? He did. I looked up that neurologist. That person was sort of a dud. And so I went with the highest rated neurologist I could find in the area of Austin, Texas at that time. It was a young guy, not too long out of residency, and he was really open to exploring new ideas. And I gave him my log kind of summarized of what I had been tracking and all that stuff. And we went through it for about an hour. And he says, "Yeah, I think you just have depression and anxiety." And I'm like, "Yeah, but does that cause all the issues with my legs and my ED and all that stuff and my vision?" And he says, "Not typically, but stress can do a lot of weird things." And I basically asked him, "I suspect it's a neurological condition like multiple sclerosis." And he says, "Well, I'm not really sure about that." I said, "Well, can you prescribe me an MRI? We can just take a look and see." And here's where things got kind of crazy because I know this wouldn't normally work other places. He said they will get angry at me if I prescribe an MRI when I don't truly think it is multiple sclerosis because of the cost of the MRI. I'll end up fighting with the insurance. I said, "You know what? I'll pay for it out of pocket if it's not MS." But at this point, I just got to know. And so he did. He worked with me and we got the MRI in place. And then I got my diagnosis, and he says, "Yep, you're a red flag case. You've got a lot of damage in your spine, you've got some damage in your head, but you are walking a line between paralysis and any type of mobility. You need to treat this thing aggressively." And this guy put his ego aside and he said, "I'm not the guy to treat you. I don't have the experience. I treat people with MS, but not at this level. You need to see an MS specialist." And then I was sent over to an MS specialist. And sure enough, they said, "Yeah, you're kind of out of control. Your MS is really bad at this point." So that was my journey. So, Daisy, that was my journey. I had to prove my case. I had to walk in there with evidence in hand. And even at that, the jury was still out. Like they weren't convinced that this was a thing. And I might still be chasing a diagnosis to this day had I not had that one guy who I could relate with and could take a collaborative approach on my care with, and we could work together and figure it out. It only takes that one person. And that leads me to the second point here. And the second one is if you're having an issue getting a diagnosis, but you truly think there's something wrong, you know when your body's not feeling right and when things don't feel right, and no one else is in your body, it's you. And you need to trust your gut on this one. I recommend finding a care team, even if you have to go to 4, 5, or 6 different appointments. Don't stop until you're comfortable. Find the people you vibe with. It's not just about the most advanced, most knowledgeable care team. It's about the people that will work with you, that are empathetic, that understand how you function. Because if you can't communicate with those people and that care team, there's no point in being there, regardless of how many accolades they have, how many patients they have, how many success stories you have. If you can't communicate with those people, you are not going to be one of those success stories. And I cannot stress that enough. In my wife's journey with cancer, we had people that just frankly didn't seem like they gave a shit whether she lived or died, either way. And then there were the guys and the girls that, whether they be nurses or doctors or even techs, were like absolutely committed to making sure she was going to walk out of that hospital that she was rolled into. And to add to that experience, I have to say, in my journey over the last 48 years of dealing with chronic asthma and pneumonia twice, and multiple sclerosis, and multiple emergency room visits, and all that stuff, same thing with my wife. I see two types of people in healthcare. Sadly, one of them is going away right now, and that's the important one. But the first one is a person that's there to have a job, and then there's a person that is there to make a difference. And the person that is there to make a difference is becoming harder to find because it is so difficult to make a difference in this bureaucracy now, but they are out there. So if you're not getting the answers you're looking for, having MS is a whole other journey and it is a lifelong journey. And from my experience, you have to build a relationship with those people that are going to be on a journey with you. And lastly, I talk about the difficulties of the American healthcare system right now. And these people are not working against us. They're working with us. They're working against a very frustrating system. And if you think our MS is frustrating, I've been on both sides of the aisle here. What the doctors and what the nurses and all the people in healthcare are dealing with right now is just mind blowingly exhausting. As a patient, what we can do to help them out is just be positive and appreciative. They understand we have our bad days and they understand they're dealing with people that have chronic conditions like MS, lupus, God knows what else, and that we feel like crap. And when we feel like crap, we can take it out on other people quite easily. Believe me, my first MS neurologist knows all about that. I look back and go, "Oh my God." If I was him, I would have thrown me out the door a long time ago. But he understood the condition and he understood how it takes a mental toll on the patient and how frustrating it is. And now I understand, after being involved in healthcare to some capacity, what they're up against. And it is equally as frustrating. The only difference is they can feel their legs, but they're dealing with the same level of stress and fatigue, believe me. So, personally, whenever I go to see my care providers, before I even walk in the office, no matter how crappy I'm feeling that day, I think to myself, okay, put myself in their shoes and let's just all be cordial and get through this. And I put on a happy face for that next 30 or 45 minutes and I tell them the reality of the situation. But believe me, they can tell when I'm feeling like crap. I don't need to say it, they can see it because they're that good. They really appreciate me leaving the unnecessary stuff out of the conversation and just trying to stick to dealing with the things that we can control and fix. And Daisy May, for your last statement here, oh man, I got to tell you, you said, I'm not sure what else to do. And this is heartbreaking. And I think we've all been there. It is so hard. You're not alone. Believe me, you're not alone. You will find your way. I'm 100% certain you are going to find your way. Please lean on the MS community. Like, we have been there. There are people that have lived with this for decades, 30 years plus, before there was any kind of medication. And then there are people that are recently diagnosed that are just dealing with the shock factor. I mean, it really runs the gamut. And there's so much great information. So please keep coming back. Be sure to subscribe and also check the comments, because people leave wonderful comments in here about how they're dealing with certain situations. And I can't be thankful enough for that. Like, I have learned so much from this community just in the last year. It's just unbelievable. And one of the many things I've learned from this community is people find a way to thrive with this disease. Please don't lose hope. Don't give up trying. I know it's a complete S show in your mind and on your life. And this one's really important. Give yourself some grace. You know, I often tell people that have been recently diagnosed, like, I didn't give myself grace for the first 2 years after my diagnosis, and my life fell apart. If you get that diagnosis, take a step back, take a minute, and get ready to adjust to a different reality. You know, you're probably not going to end up being who you thought you were going to be or the way you thought you were going to be. But as humans, we're dynamic. We can roll with it and we will figure it out. Yes, MS sucks. It totally sucks. But there can be things that are worse than multiple sclerosis. Most importantly, we can really relate to other people with MS. And there's a purpose for us out there. I believe that. Please keep us updated on your journey. Thank you so much for the question. I am like out of energy. It is getting so hot. It's just unbelievable. The air conditioner can't even keep up with the heat here in North Carolina, which has been like record breaking. And for Daisy and everybody else out there, I have some really exciting content coming up very soon. My wife and I have been working on it for quite some time. We just finished up filming a segment a few days ago that blew my mind with how it came out. And I think you guys are going to love it. So stay tuned. I appreciate you all. And until next time, I'm out.